All right, folks, welcome to another deep dive. And today we're heading straight into the center of some serious East Asian geopolitics. It's all about Japan's military expansion.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating topic and a crucial one, I think, for our listeners out there who are prepping for the UPSC exams.
Absolutely. You'll see it come up in both mains and prelims.
For sure. And to really get a handle on this, we're going to be dissecting a pretty pointed opinion piece from the Global Times.
A Chinese state-affiliated media outlet, just to give everyone the context.
Exactly, because understanding different viewpoints, especially on sensitive international issues like this one, well, that's key for those exams.
Couldn't agree more. And what makes this even more intriguing is the sheer scale of the change.
Oh, absolutely. We're not talking about like a little budget adjustment here.
No. This is a major shift.
Japan's proposing to boost their defense spending to over 2% of their GDP.
Which is huge when you consider that their GDP growth has been kind of just, hanging around 1–2%.
Right. It's a pretty bold move. And the Global Times, well, they have some thoughts about it.
Oh, they definitely do. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. The numbers, Japan's 2025 fiscal year budget. It's laying out a 9.4% year-on-year increase in defense spending.
Setting a new record. Which
is what makes this whole thing even more thought-provoking. The Global Times is pointing out that this prioritizing of military it's happening at a time when Japan's got its own internal economic issues going on.
Exactly, like rising prices, for example.
Right, and they even bring up criticism from some Japanese scholars who are basically saying, hold on, the government should be focusing on these domestic problems.
Not dropping a ton of money on weapons.
Especially not from the U.S.
Yeah, that adds another layer to it, for sure.
It really does. It's like this beggar thy neighbor kind of argument that the Global Times is making.
Right. The idea that Japan focusing so much on military buildup could actually end up hurting their own economic well-being and stability in the long run.
Oh, yeah, that makes total sense. Trying to solve your problems by, pushing the burden onto your neighbors.
Which pretty much never works out well for anyone involved.
No, it doesn't. But the Global Times goes even deeper than that.
Oh, yeah. They don't just see it as like a bad economic move. They frame it as this intentional strategy.
Aimed at a very specific adversary.
Exactly. They argue that Japan is using the whole Chinese military threat as justification for this military expansion.
It's fascinating how they connect those dots.
It is. And they highlight these two main defense goals from Japan's national defense strategy that they say are basically aimed right at China.
Which are?
So the first one is preventing any unilateral changes to the status quo by force. And then the second is deterring any attempts to threaten Japan's peace and security.
Okay, so that's where things get really interesting.
Right.
Because the Global Times suggests that Japan is essentially, painting a target on China's back by basically interpreting actions like China's efforts to, safeguard its own sovereignty in places like the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits.
As those exact threats that Japan is supposedly gearing up to counter.
It's a powerful argument.
It is. And the Global Times sees this as a really dangerous escalation of tensions, potentially even pushing the whole region towards conflict.
So essentially they're claiming that Japan, working alongside the U.S., is purposely amplifying this whole China threat narrative to justify beefing up their military.
Even if the threat itself might be more perceived than real,
Right. So we're seeing this clash of narratives here. China sees Japan as being provocative, and Japan maybe feels threatened by China's actions.
Absolutely.
It's a very complex situation, and the Global Times is definitely giving us a specific angle to consider.
Which is super important for UPSC aspirants to be able to analyze critically.
Definitely. But before we jump into all of that, let's take a quick pause here.
It really is complex. And the Global Times, they don't stop there. They take it a step further and connect it to Japan's history.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and their pacifist stance, For decades, Japan's had this exclusively defense-oriented policy.
Right.
Portraying themselves as this, peace-loving nation after World War II.
Makes sense, given the devastation.
Right, but the Global Times is kind of hinting that this image might be, cracking a bit.
That is a really interesting point. So how does this military expansion tie into all of that history? I mean, it's been 80 years since the end of World War II. The Global Times saying Japan's going back to its militaristic past?
Not directly, but they do draw some parallels. They bring up this thing called the Cairo Declaration.
Okay, I vaguely remember that.
It's from 1943, and it basically said that Japan's ability to wage war should be total destroyed.
Right, disarmed.
Exactly. And they shouldn't be allowed to rearm. So the Global Times uses this historical document to kind of question Japan's current path.
I see. So they're basically saying, hold on a minute, didn't Japan promise to renounce war? How does all this military buildup fit with that?
That's the gist of it. They're using history to scrutinize Japan's actions and their intentions.
Which is a powerful tactic, especially when you think about East Asian geopolitics.
Mm-hmm.
Those memories of World War II are still very much alive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's not just about history. The Global Times is also pointing out some real concerns about the types of weapons Japan's investing in.
Like what specifically?
Well, they mention things like long-range missiles and drones, offensive weapons systems.
Which is pretty significant.
Right. It's a big change from their usual focus on just defense. And it raises the question of whether Japan's moving away from their pacifist constitution.
Towards a more, I don't know, proactive, offensive military strategy.
Exactly. And what's interesting is the Global Times isn't the only one with these concerns.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They highlight that even within Japan, there's pushback against this military expansion.
Interesting.
Like they mention peace groups questioning the government's motives and even starting petitions against the increased spending.
Wow. So it's not just external criticism. It's a contentious issue within Japan itself.
For sure. It adds another layer of complexity.
It does. And it's something UPSC aspirants should pay attention to. It shows that even in a country that seems unified, there can be totally different perspectives on stuff like military spending and national security.
Right.
Definitely. So we've got Japan potentially shifting away from pacifism, historical anxieties resurfacing, and even divisions within Japan about this whole military buildup. It's a lot to process, and the Global Times is painting a pretty critical picture. But of course, this is just one perspective.
Absolutely. And it's really important for UPSC aspirants to remember that.
Right. You've got to consider different viewpoints before forming your own opinion.
Exactly. While the Global Times gives us valuable insights into how China sees Japan's actions, it's crucial to remember that they're a state-affiliated outlet.
Meaning?
Their analysis is probably shaped by China's own interests and concerns, you know?
Makes sense. To get the whole picture, you'd need to look at perspectives from Japan, too, and other key players in the region.
Exactly, like the U.S. and India.
All right, so for our UPSC folks out there, let's tie this all together. We've really dug into the Global Times take on Japan's military expansion, analyzed their worries about the jump in defense spending, the whole portrayal of China as this big threat, the potential shift away from pacifism, and even all that historical baggage that gets brought up. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely a multifaceted issue with some major regional and global implications. And like we've been talking about the Global Times perspective, it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. And that's where the real learning happens. For those of you prepping for the UPSC, you got to be able to analyze all these different viewpoints, figure out the motivations behind them, and then come to your own conclusions. So let's put the spotlight on YU now.
Yeah, considering everything we've discussed, what do you think are the possible outcomes of Japan's military expansion? How could this affect stability in the Indo-Pacific? And maybe even more important for our listeners in India, how might this impact India's own strategies in the region?
These are the big questions, folks, the ones that really matter. And we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts. Start a discussion down in the comments section.
We're all about having those insightful conversations here on The Deep Dive.
Absolutely. And remember, critical thinking is key. Don't just take everything you hear at face value. Dig a little deeper. Do some more research and come to your own well-informed opinions. That's how you're going to crush those UPSC exams.
Couldn't agree more. And for those who found today's deep dive helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more analysis on all the current events that are relevant to those UPSC exams. We're here to help you succeed.
That's what we're all about. And just a reminder, our source for this deep dive was that opinion piece from the Global Times, which we've been dissecting, definitely offers a specific take on this complex issue. So be sure to check out other sources and viewpoints as you continue your UPSC journey.
Exactly. Keep those minds sharp.
Until next time, happy studying, everyone.